Let's ask my friend and co-host of The Five, Juan Williams. He's author of the fantastic book, Enough, The Phony Leaders, Den-Ed Movements, and Culture of Failure That Are Undermining Black America and What We Can Do About It. Juan, so great to have you back on the show.
My pleasure, Andrea. How are you?
I'm great. So listen, your book that you wrote, Enough, it's timely now. I mean, you know, you read a lot of the things that you were saying, Juan, in your book, Enough, about leaders like Sharpton and about leaders like Jesse Jackson. And yesterday, Juan, they didn't seem happy with this not guilty verdict. And as you heard me mention, Al Sharpton's going to be planning more rallies. Jesse Jackson took a shot at the jurors, which I saw a little bit of sexism in. I mean, there seems to be this veiled hinting around that 6 women didn't get it right. Jesse Jackson said it should have been Black men on the jury. They would have gotten it right. What do you think about what leaders like Sharpton and Jesse Jackson are saying now? Help or hurts the situation?
Well, I think it hurts the situation. I mean, one, I think, and I thought your language was right, I think it fans the flames. And the problem here is not that I think this was a great verdict. I think technically it's probably the right verdict because I don't believe the prosecution met the challenge of proving that there was race involved or malice involved in the shooting of Trayvon Martin. To my mind, the prosecution not only failed to meet the standard of proving that, but they failed to me to prove anything. I mean, it just was a weak prosecution. So by that standard, I think they technically got it right. Do I think it was justice? Nah, because I think there was no justice for the Martin family. There's a dead young man, 17 years old, involved, and I think the family probably walks away thinking nobody acknowledges that we lost our child. Okay, I understand that. But when you see Sharpton and Jackson and that kind get involved here, you would hope that they were giving vent to people who feel frustrated over the verdict. You were hoping that they were saying, you know what, this is the system. This time it didn't work in the way that we liked, but this is the American system. This is the justice system as we know it. And remember, the parents asked for one thing way back. They wanted their son's case to get a trial. Initially, the police had not arrested George Zimmerman. There had been no attempt to charge George Zimmerman. The governor of Florida, a Republican, I might add, Andrea, Rick Scott, had appointed a special prosecutor who then came in and filed the charges. So the family, and the family's lawyers, by the way, have acknowledged they got what they asked for. They got the trial. And so at that point, you have to say, well, okay, we didn't get the verdict we wanted, but this is the system. And somehow Sharpton and Jackson refused to live with that. And that's my problem. And again, it fits what you were talking about when you introduced this segment so acutely, I thought. It's the media that tried to impose a racial form on this, superimpose it, because that's the narrative they wanted, which was a white man shooting a black kid for no reason, and it's the evil white man and the good black kid. You say, wait a second, hold on. First of all, Hispanics, Asians, everybody can have racial attitudes in this society, but that's what they had to have a white person. And secondly, you know what? You have to acknowledge that what this man said, Zimmerman said, was, look, I was a neighborhood watch guy. Maybe he acted improperly in continuing to follow Trayvon Martin. I never will understand why he got out of the car. But what the defense did was focus on a fight and say that in the middle of the fight, he defended himself and he chose to do so in an extreme measure with a gun and kill the kid. But that's what the jury heard. The prosecution didn't knock it down, and that's what we have right now.
And Juan, as you point out, and this is what I thought was the most gripping piece of the interview last night that the juror did with Anderson Cooper, she disguised her image, but she said, none of us saw race in this case. Now, of course, the beauty of a jury, even though, and I've pointed this out, Juan, Republicans have tried, some of them, to get rid of jury trials with this whole tort reform nonsense, and I've blasted them for that. I mean, we've tried to cover this case really fair, Juan, because the process really does work. When you get a jury of your peers, something magical happens in that jury box. And she went on to talk about how when it was time to decide the verdict, they were split. One person wanted murder too, another wanted acquittal, another wanted manslaughter. She was a not guilty verdict. But when they reviewed the tapes over and over and over, and they read the law over and over and over, they could not get a conviction. And so the system really worked. And I want to know, some people are out there and they're saying, well, when the O.J. Simpson verdict came down, people like Sharpton, people like Jesse Jackson were celebrating. The system did work. It did work. And, I read some comments on different blogs, and some people said, well, that was because a black man was on trial for killing a white woman. Now, when you have, a black kid that was killed by George Zimmerman, this white Hispanic term, which I'd love you to weigh in, by the way. I mean, if you think that Zimmerman really is Hispanic or if he's white, you get a different outcome from that community that you write about in your book, Enough. Do you think that that's correct, and why?
Well, I think that, I didn't think the O.J. verdict was right. I don't know about you, but I thought that was an abomination of justice. But again, in that situation, you can say people, especially the blacks on that jury, said, we didn't believe the cops. It was, the cops were using the N-word, and the cops were playing with the evidence, and they had a long history of anger between the cops in L.A. and the black community. And, so that's the history. And as I thought it was, a travesty of justice what happened there. So in this case, I think there's a big difference, though, Andrea. I don't think that, race and the racial tensions in Sanford, Florida, were what dominated here. I will say I'm very, and I think lots of people, including, as I said, the governor of Florida, had questions about why wasn't Zimmerman arrested and why weren't there's an investigation of charges. Now, initially people said it was the new stand your ground law in Florida that allows people to do it. But I can tell you, I've not only spoken with Governor Bush, who was the governor in Florida when the stand your ground law was enacted, but with law enforcement who said they didn't think it was really about what happened in that situation. They're talking about a situation where someone was threatening you, and here's a situation where obviously Zimmerman was the one with the gun and the one who got out of his car and started the confrontation. So nobody thinks it was that. So what you have here is a situation, and I want to just quickly insert here response to your point, that the media had to make him white. That's what they wanted to do. I don't think there's any question. I wrote a piece for FoxNews.com last week in which I said it's not only NBC News that, inserted and made it appear as if he was talking about Martin's race when he was simply answering a question from the dispatcher, but the New York Times with the white Hispanic business. This goes on and on with the media to no end, trying to, again, create a civil rights story from the 1950s or 40s when it's not that.
Juan, I want to ask you about the definition of white Hispanic, and we talked about your piece on FoxNews.com right here on this show last week, where you really ripped the media for how they have just devolved us and hit the rewind button when it comes to race relations and the talk about crackers and teenage mammies. And you had Piers Morgan last night asking about the difference between the N-word ending in an ER and the N-word ending in an A. I mean, I was disgusted by the entire thing, I have to say. Juan, the president weighed in on this, and according to an article I dug up from Politico, he got a lot of pressure from members of the black community to weigh in on this, the way that he weighed in on the Sandra Fluck birth control issue. How much, Juan, does President Obama listen to the Sharptons and pressure from the Jesse Jacksons of the world?
I think he listens to Sharpton a little bit. I think he and Jackson have a long history of animosity. They don't like each other. But, to me, in fact, you have some of the radical black community who think that he's not black enough and he's never done enough and all that. Of course, you know that 90+% of black America supports him. I think that he has a sense of not ever wanting to turn his back on the black community, and then it's a self-imposed pressure that he feels, he's got to once in a while show that he is black. When he came out in if you remember that situation up in Boston, Andrea, with the professor, where there was the Bear Summit afterwards, I think he really, he tripped over his own feet. In this situation, simply saying that he understood the family's pain, I can more understand it. But the point is, and I think this is the reminder time and again, keep politics out of it, will you? Just keep the politics out of it. You know what? It was a legal case. It was a matter that should go to trial. It should have been before a jury. It got before a jury. We have a verdict. Respect the verdict. That's life. If you want to change the laws, if you want to say, you know what, we didn't like the way the laws were applied here. Right. It didn't deliver justice as we saw it.
Juan, the president is half black and half white. Zimmerman is half Hispanic. He has a Mexican mother. Where's the Hispanic community, Juan, on this? Where's La Raza? Where's Eva Longoria? Where's George Lopez? Where's all the tweets from the Hispanic community? And is Zimmerman even Hispanic?
Yeah, I think he's half Peruvian and half white. His father's white, his mother's Peruvian. But you know what? I think there's, again, because the media is so crazy on this topic, you just have to stop and shake your head. I just don't understand. They think that somebody who is Hispanic or Asian or Native American doesn't have attitudes about race, about white people, about black people, about their own race. Guess what? You just watch American media. You see that there's all kinds of racial imagery and stereotypes and caricatures out there, but they needed to make Zimmerman white, and I thought that was just offensive.
But Juan, and I only have about 30 seconds left. Juan, where's the Hispanic community on this one? You hear from the black community. Where is La Raza? Where's Representative Gutierrez? Where are all the Hispanics saying, stop doing this to him? He is Hispanic.
No, apparently they don't feel that way. And again, I think this is what you see in terms of civil rights leadership in the country. It's all about pursuing long ago, and in my opinion, sometimes grievances that have been expired. There should be an expiration date, like a carton of milk on some of these things, but they pursue that, and they pursue the old narrative, the one that the media tried to force on this case, because I think it makes them into victims, and it makes them somehow feel as if they're entitled to something. It is madness. To me, they should be pursuing a more aggressive agenda that says, here is who we are, here's what we can do, here's how we can solve problems.